case, Chinese people in the room, and there was an interpreter next to me because nobody was speaking English, so he interpreted everything that I said. And I like to crack a joke every now and then in my workshops, and the people were always laughing, and I was starting getting suspicious after a while. They were always laughing at my jokes. And in the evening, I asked my translator, what do you do when something doesn't translate well to Chinese? And then he said, well, in that case, I say, Mr. Jurgen just made a joke. Now we all have to laugh. I thought it was very funny. And I'm pretty sure he was very honest about that. Anyways, that's one of my favorite moments from China. Haier is famous for being the world's largest home appliance brand. They make fridges, air conditioning, also computers, even gaming computers, and vacuum cleaners, and so on and so on. The most valuable Internet of Things ecosystem brand in the world, and the world's most creatively managed company, according to Gary Hamel, who wrote several management books. Why? Because they are an ecosystem of 4,000 autonomous units. You can imagine 4,000 startups and scale-ups in a horizontal plane, in a network, working together, and together they are a company. At that time, they had 3,000 units, and they had just gone through that transformation when I was there, and they asked for my advice. Amazing. I don't think I had any good advice at the time because I had never seen something like that before. But they were very adaptive. They were very adaptable because they were a network. And this is something mentioned in this book, Designing Organizations by Jay Galbraith, one of the world's leaders in organization design. He said, every company needs organizations that change as quickly as their business environments do. So why not design organizations that are constantly and quickly changeable? And yeah, that is the holy grail, I would say, for businesses, to be nimble and versatile and agile, and we have all kinds of words for that, easily changeable. Well, I think for that we need patterns. What are patterns? Well, let's go back to the example of cities. I began with a picture of my hometown. Here is another one of the Erasmus Bridge in my city. And the famous book in architecture and urban planning, urban design, is A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. He came up with the concept of patterns, collecting them, naming them, and then offering them as building blocks, in this case for cities and architecture. So for example, what he captured was the concept of the town square. The town square is a very useful pattern. It means you have several roads coming together in an open area in a city, and then cafes and shops will pop up there organically. And it will be a nice place for people to gather if you put some benches and trees there as well. Every city that I remember has at least a couple of these squares. It is a very common, useful pattern. This is a rather large one on the picture in Rotterdam. One of my favorite buildings, the Central Station. So I think it counts. I think it counts as a square. Another pattern in the book by Christopher Alexander is the promenade. He said it is a good idea to have a somewhat wider street where people can stroll in a relaxed manner, with places of interest, activity nodes along the way, like art or shops or something like that. And then again, that will be a nice place for people to come together. Well, every city I know has some of these promenades indeed. And the picture that you see here is from my hometown again, the Lijnbaan. It is actually the first pedestrian-only, car-free shopping street in the world, according to Wikipedia. I'm a little bit proud of that the people in Rotterdam invented that. And the third pattern I will show you from the book is the children's way. That is, making sure that children can get safely through the city without having to cross busy streets with tunnels, little tunnels, bridges, sideways, paths, and small paths, whatever. And I cheated here because this is not at all a children's way. This is the market hall, my favorite building, perhaps, in my hometown. So as you notice, I am a little bit proud of my city. I hope you forgive me for that. So pattern languages are collections of good ideas. They are micro solutions that can be used in many ways, depending on context. Every city is different, but they all have town squares and promenades and probably children's ways as well. And there are 253 of these patterns in that book by Christopher Alexander. He was the first to do this, and then the concept was copied by others. For example, this is a famous book in IT, Design Patterns by the Gang of Four, where they captured 23 patterns for architecture and software design. Facade, Singleton, Model View Controller, and a couple of others. The book sold millions as far as I understood. So what would be good patterns for organization design? Well, I found a number from different sources, and I'd like to offer some of these to you in this talk. First of all, the base. Some people might call it the tribe or the clan. Business unit is perhaps an old-fashioned term. What I mean is a relatively small number of people that form a group where everyone feels safe and at home. I can tell you an example of experience that I had where there was clearly no base. I was working at a huge consultancy company, thousands of people in the Netherlands 20 years ago. They rented out my brain as a .NET programmer. And I had a team of 4 people sent to a client, and I loved my team. I really liked what we were doing, and I enjoyed my work there. But I didn't know anyone else in the company of 4,000 or 5,000 people where I was sent from. I only knew my manager and I knew the HR person, basically. So I had no base. I had no home to return to at that company. So I cared not a thing about the whole organization. And I quit my job within a year. I felt actually completely lost, except for that small team at the client. So the base is one of the first patterns that I really recommend that organizations consider. It's a small number of people, not 4,000. That doesn't work. The human brain is not able to handle a community that large. We need a small family-sized circle where we feel safe and at home, and where we feel psychological safety. That's a big thing nowadays, recognition and belonging and so on. And then moving on, within that base, we will probably have some teams. I like using the word crew, which is a team on a mission with a defined goal. I'm okay with you using the word team or squad or something, that no problems whatsoever. I just like the word crew because team is a bit overloaded these days. I heard an executive refer to their company of 100,000 people as a team. And I thought, that's not a team, that's an enterprise. That's a different thing. But okay, so different people have different meanings for team. I like the word crew. And then I borrowed 4 patterns from team topologies. Matthew Skelton, Manuel Paes did a really good job finding already 4 very good patterns for organization design. I tweaked them a little bit. I tried to stay true to their colors. I changed the name a bit to make it fit with the other stuff that I was doing. So, for example, the stream-aligned team is, for me, the dream crew, but it's the same thing. It's the end-to-end value stream that they are responsible for. They work as independently as possible without requiring handoffs to other teams. We know how this works in the Agile community, so no need to explain more, I assume. Scrum teams, feature teams, Agile teams, they go by many names. It's the same pattern. We draw them yellow horizontally in team topologies, and I followed their example. So that's the first pattern, and that should be the default, I would say. But sometimes there are exceptions. For example, you need a team of coaches sometimes, an enabling team, they call it in team topologies. A couple of people who help the yellow ones, who help them get started, get onboarded, help them with their continuous improvement, or they may help them coordinating backlogs across various teams. The end goal for that kind of team in team topologies is that there should not be a permanent dependency on them. So preferably they should be temporary. I agree with that in principle. I call them facilitation crew because they facilitate stuff. They not only enable, but I think they can have a semi-permanent relationship. I am okay with that because, to be honest, I know some people like having a personal trainer, and no exercise happens without the personal trainer. I am perfectly fine with that. I don't need a PT, but my spouse does, and there's nothing wrong with that. To have a coach who helps you always raise the bar and have that as sort of a semi-permanent relationship, I'm fine with that. As long as they could work on their own when necessary. So the facilitation crew is the second one, and then we draw them purple, so across the other ones, same as in team topologies. And then the third one, that will be the capability crew. In team topologies, that's the complicated subsystem team. Now, I would think this is a bit of a complicated term, to be honest, because well, actually, it started with the idea of the component team that is used in many organizations, and many say this is an anti-pattern. I would agree with that. You don't want a few people to own a component that other teams, Agile teams, are dependent on. However, the problem is that some components require really deep expertise and unique capabilities. For example, machine learning, cybersecurity experts, video codecs, whatnot. And if you have 20 Agile teams, and you have two people who know all about encryption of video data, you cannot just distribute that knowledge and experience across 20 different teams. It's just impossible. And the same applies to other situations where you have a few people with rare skills, and they may be hard to come by in the market. They might be expensive, these people. So you're glad to have 2 or 3 available for 20 teams. In that case, it is okay to have such a complicated subsystem team, as they call it in team topologies, and then say, well, guess what? Actually, this is not about the component. This is about those rare capabilities. It is about the expertise. That is the bottleneck, sadly, but there's no way of simply solving that and giving everyone the same amount of knowledge in cybersecurity or video encoding and encryption. It would overload people's brains. In team topologies, they say the cognitive load for the teams becomes too large. So in my opinion, this is about the capability, the expertise of a few people. That's why I call them the capability crew. We draw them red, and they hover around, they offer their services where needed, and then they work with the teams on those value streams. The last example that I borrowed from team topologies is the platform crew. And in this case, team topologies assumes that this is IT services. You can imagine a microservices company relying heavily on a DevOps infrastructure to be able to release many times per day. I have seen such organizations. They have separate teams offering the infrastructure, the platform to everyone else. Take the worries off of their minds and allow them to generate value on the platforms. Again, this is a cognitive load thing. You cannot in practice demand that all those yellow value stream crews have a full tech stack people down to the metal of the machines. At some point, you just hand it over to a platform that you operate on. And then I say, again, I take it a little bit broader. I say, well, actually, it doesn't have to be just IT services. It can also be human services that you offer. I was in a company in Poland a good number of years ago, future processing in Katowice, and they had kindergarten on site. They had daycare for children. It was 100 people in the office and quite a lot of young people, and some of them had kids. So the company offered the service, drop your baby, your toddler in the morning, and you can pick them up when you're done at the end of the day. And our promise is they would still be alive and well fed. And that's a service. That's a platform service, in my opinion. It's a human service instead of a digital service. So we draw them green in this model, and together they are the four patterns that I borrowed from team topologies. But I did not stop there. I also borrowed a pattern from this book, Networked, Scaled, and Agile. They had a really good observation that I can illustrate with you with an example. I recently bought a new phone, my lovely Google Pixel 6. I'm slightly annoyed that the Pixel 7 is already announced, but hey, that's my life. But when I bought the phone, as you know how it goes, you have to re-authenticate with every app on your phone. It drives you nuts. It's a whole week of work with the 100 apps that you have, logging in 100 times, etc. So I had to do that with the banking app as well. I had to make one payment, and the bank said, you need to log in. And then the app said, by the way, you have to change your password because the password is expired. I have to change my password every 3 months. Absurd. But anyways, and the app said, you need to do that on the website. Okay, so I went to the website to enter my old password, new password twice, and I wanted to submit it. And then the website said, now please validate this with your app on your smartphone. But I couldn't do that because the app didn't work yet on my smartphone. I needed to change the password first, but I couldn't change the password because I had to validate the app first. I was stuck. I was stuck between an app and a website. Now, individually, these are fine products. I have nothing to complain about considering the app. I have no issues with the website. I see there are agile teams behind them. They're often updated and good experiences. But in between, it's a problem. So there are examples abound of the crippling effects of agile business units that cannot work together to deliver a complete customer experience at the enterprise level, is what this book said. You have these islands of agility, teams focusing on their products or their product areas. But the customer is not interested in products. The customer is interested in a holistic experience. They have a journey, a customer journey with lots of touch points with the company, not only across app and website, but also physical stores, marketing and sales, finance that they get invoices from, and so on. So this book says you'll need some people that watch the entire experience across everything that you offer as a company. And I would call that the experience crew. They dig into the data. They observe what customers are doing when they move from one place to the other across different products and so on. Try to optimize everything instead of ending up with these islands of agility, and then they feed their findings back to the teams and their respective backlogs. And then I think, well, if you have that for customers, why not for suppliers on the other side? The experience economy coincides with the gig economy. Lots of companies work with freelancers, suppliers, gig workers, contractors, and so on. They deserve a decent experience. I had an annoying one just 2 days ago in Poland. Someone offered me a book to sign, and that turned out to be the Polish translation of Managing for Happiness. And I said, oh, well, that's nice. I didn't even know there was a Polish translation. It would be nice if the publisher informed me about this. And that was not the first time. I also was informed by translators that the Japanese translation was nearly ready. And again, the publisher had not informed me about this, because that's how publishing goes. They completely forget you as an author once they have the book and start selling it and translating it across the world. You're out of sight and out of mind. And it's the same with gig workers and freelancers and so on. Many organizations care about the customers, but not so much about the suppliers. This is the reason why Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam is these days a shithole airport. I'm sorry to say, I am so embarrassed as a Dutch person for the airport that we have ended up with. There were lines of 4 hours this summer. It was a disaster. Why? Because the airport had screwed thumbs on the suppliers. They treated the baggage handlers and the security personnel badly. They underpaid them. And then when COVID hit 2.5 years ago, everyone left. There was nothing to do, and they didn't come back, because why would you? Schiphol had a very bad reputation, so they couldn't get any personnel. And then who suffers? The customers. So it is very bad to mistreat your suppliers and so on. Last but not least, where does the management go? Well, there's a pattern for that. Manage the system, not the people, is what I always said with Management 3.0. And that is the governance crew, the blue ones at the top. And I keep saying, I very much insist, the managers should stay out of everything else. You don't want them on the value stream crews. You don't want them on a platform crew. You don't want them on any of the others, because as soon as managers work on a team, you will have territories, and that makes things not easy to change. Remember where we got started. We want things to easily changeable. We want people to reorganize and say, you know what, maybe we need 3 value streams instead of 2, or maybe we need 2 instead of 3. That should be up to the self-organizing teams to decide how to restructure themselves. And that should not be managers protecting their territories. So you try to keep them out of everywhere else and have them in the governance crew and let them manage the whole system, not the people. And of course, they also communicate to shareholders and executives up there if there are any layers above. And that gives you 7 team types, 7 crew types, very simple set to get started with. And you can draw lots of different things. I will show you some examples. The scaled agile framework. Gosh, I hear so many people complaining about this one. I have no personal experience with SAFe, so it would be unfair for me to complain about it. But I do see that they have some very good practices captured in a model that is quite static, that says you should have an arch, an agile release train. That is essential to have an agile release train with program increments and cadence and so on. Well, so far so good, but I would call that the fully integrated base that is in the upper left. Is that left or right? I always get confused when I do a webinar. The fully integrated base is one where all the different teams depend on each other because they create one big thing. They create one solution, one product, and they release it all at the same time, as the Scaled Agile framework says you're doing with an art. But that's just one out of 4 options. A second option would be a strongly aligned base. Here you have a couple of value stream crews that work a bit more independently, that can release at their own cadence. Some do Scrum, maybe some do Kanban or something else. And they offer APIs to each other, perhaps with like microservices. They rely heavily on platforms for their infrastructure. Maybe they have a customer experience team and a supplier experience team to deal with the outside world, like Netflix has, like LinkedIn and these big platforms where they work with lots of microservices teams on the inside. They don't do safe there. They have no cadence for a big releases. The next option will be the loosely aligned base. In this case, it could be a consultancy, it could be an outsourcing company where the teams do different kind of projects, where they deliver value to different clients. So no dependencies whatsoever between them. The only dependency you have is who works for which customer when. So you might need to do a bit of project management or account management, the traditional kinds, perhaps, to make sure that there's enough capacity in the base to offer value to customers. The last of the 4 examples, the fully segregated one, it goes even a step further. Then you would have teams that could actually be competing with each other. I was at Rovio, the makers of Angry Birds in Helsinki. They have lots of small teams making mobile games. And in practice, these are competing with each other because a game player can play only one game at a time. And the teams are measured for their eyeballs that they can capture, the advertising revenue, the number of player minutes, and so on. The management doesn't care who is the winner, which team has the most players, as long as there are some winners. And the losers, okay, tough luck. Let's see what we've learned, and we're going to try another game. So the base has healthy competition, friendly competition between the teams, all releasing their own stuff. And probably there are things going across, like customer experience team is going to do the data mining of customers across the various products. Of course, they want to see who is moving, which client is moving, or which player is moving from one game to the other. And also another example would be an incubator in a larger enterprise where you have internal startups, maybe trying to solve the same problem, but in different ways. Again, the investment team doesn't care who's the winner as long as someone solves the problem. So that's 4 different kinds of bases, 4 different kinds of putting these patterns together. SAFe is only one type of these 4 archetypes, you could say. Another example to share with you, large-scale Scrum, the LESS framework, they suggest that you should have long-lived teams. Actually, on the website, it says the team should be together forever. It sounds a bit threatening almost, a bit ominous. Again, that is actually only 1 out of 4 options. I'm a systems thinker, a complexity thinker. I like thinking in terms of systems and boundaries. And you might imagine the boundary around a team to have 2 attributes. One is, how long does this boundary exist? If it is long, you have a long-lived team. Short, you have a short-lived team, duh. And the other thing is, how permeable is that boundary? Are people stuck within it, or do they easily move between those teams? And by varying these, you have 4 options, 4 categories. So the steady teams is what the LESS framework prefers: long-lived and team membership changes rarely or not at all. That's the fixed, steady team. However, dynamic team is another option. Redgate Software publishes articles on their reteaming events, where once per year people can choose to work on another team, and then about 1/3 of people volunteer to find themselves in another position somewhere else. And that is more dynamic. The team itself stays as a cohesive unit, is long-lived, but membership through it is more flexible. Then at the bottom, you find two other options when there's a short-lived team. One is the mission team, where the team is together for a short amount of time. Think an airline crew, for example. That's a short-term mission team. They don't change team membership mid-flight. That's very uncommon to do that. So there are examples of that in software development as well. I will show you in a moment. And the other one is the liquid team. There's construction crews sometimes working on my house. Actually, right now, maybe you've heard some drilling. That's the way it is with remote working. And these construction crews, they are liquid teams. Every morning we make coffee for different people. Sometimes it's masonry, sometimes carpenters, sometimes window cleaners. Together they're one team, but they come in and out, and someone is managing all of that, apparently. But for us, we see a different team members all the time. But they're short term, because the construction takes only a month or two, and then the whole project is done. Now, I showed you here options, choice, and I think organization design should be like that. I like the metaphor of Lego. You have lots of different options. It is up to you to put the right options together, depending on what you want. And I'm a big Lego fan. When I was young already, I had a big Lego box, and actually my brother was into Playmobil. And I didn't understand that at all, because when he got a castle for his birthday, then it could only be a castle. And if he'd take it apart, then he would have a broken castle. It could not be anything else. When I got a hospital for my birthday, a Lego hospital, maybe it was a hospital for 2 days. And then the third day it was a spaceship. And maybe the next week it was a dragon, or something like that, because I was creative and I turned it into other things. And I think that's a nice metaphor for organization design and pattern languages. They should be option lists, not shopping lists. So last few minutes, and then maybe some people have some questions for me. There's a Miro template for those who want to play with the patterns, where you can put things together in any way you want. There are case studies online where existing companies were described by me or by others using the unFIX patterns. So, for example, Pipedrive is a very nice case study of a company that has these value stream crews, and they have a combination of the mission teams and the dynamic teams, because the dynamic team is the launch pad, which is their maintenance team. They're at the bottom in every tribe, in every base. And they have temporary mission teams for short-term objectives, but there's continuous rotation between them. So when someone volunteers to go on a mission team 1 or 2 or 3 times, then they're expected to go back to the launch pad, maintenance, for a while. And if someone has been on maintenance for too long, they are expected to go on a mission next time. But together they form one tribe, and the tribe is about 20 people, not too large. So yes, it's still, you build the code, you own it, but sometimes you can focus on a mission and sometimes you can focus on maintenance. And that is how they solve this dynamic at Pipedrive. And all of it is based on volunteering. There is no manager involved doing any planning. The engineers decide for themselves. So that's a combination of dynamic team for maintenance and mission teams for short-term objectives. No steady teams at Pipedrive. So it's not necessary for you to have this in software. It's an option. You can choose. It's your organization. You do the design. The other example I have is Coolblue, a web shop in the Netherlands, second largest web shop here, 2,000 people, 2.5 billion euros, so pretty big. And I did a case study on them. I found that they have bases. They have 30 of them, all relatively small, about 20, 30 people. And they have a quite big, fat experience crew. The pink one with business analysts, business owners, customer journey experts. They put a lot of effort in optimizing the customer journey. And it shows because they have a net promoter score of plus 67. That is very, very high. And just for comparison, I once read that the Scaled Agile framework has a net promoter score of minus 56. So imagine the distance there. But in the case of Coolblue, it's normal, steady teams that they have. They do Scrum by the book with regular, long-lived teams that rarely change. So yeah, that can work as well. That was their choice. I told you about Hire in the beginning. Hire is 4,000 units. That's 4,000 bases, 4,000 micro enterprises, and each of them can be organized in a different way. But the network itself repeats the same patterns because some of these micro enterprises focus on platform stuff, the Internet of Things. Some of the micro enterprises form a cluster of value stream units together, so that a couple of them together make a new kind of fridge or a new kind of air conditioning. Some micro enterprises focus on the customer experience and know everything about clients with data analytics and so on and so on. So you see the same patterns in the whole network emerging. The unFIX community has people submitting their own examples of how they combined the patterns in different ways, how they use the Lego box to their own advantage, it basically up to you to decide what you want to draw. And the message is, of course, that you have to change things according to context. Because I had some people tell me, Jurgen, this is too colorful. I cannot sell this to my managers. There's too many colors. And why are some people smiling and why are some people laughing? Hey, I'm just a creative person. I like having a bit of fun with the things that I design. I hope that shines through in the slide. But if you need to change the message a bit, if you need to adapt it to your audience, to your managers, then okay, make your own version that they can more easily identify with, so that they understand what you're talking about. So that's my my contribution so far. If you want to know more about Hire, by the way, a new book came out, Startup Factory, by two Dutch guys, Joost Minnaar, Pim de Moray. I met them 2 weeks ago. Great guys. They went in depth with the Hire story. So if you're really interested in how such a company works for 1,000 independent units, you could read this book. And I hope to see some of you on the unFIX.org website. There are a lot more patterns to be discovered. Christopher Alexander had 253 of them in one book. We are not yet there by far, but it is good to have options so you can make your own method. So thank you so much for listening, and I hand it back over to the organizers.
Thank you very much for, hello?
Hey.
Hey, you can hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your inspiring talk. Who has a question for Jurgen? I think they're pretty stunned by your talk.
Hello, Jurgen. Here's Almudena.
Hey, Almudena. Nice to hear you.
So far, here comes the first mean question. What is the biggest company with so far work with unFIX? And was unFIX tried? I know it is very young. I know it's a very mean question. Was unFIX tried so far outside the software industry?
So two questions. Yes. First one, I got started on January 1st. And I am still all alone. I have done all of this myself. So first of all, it is too early to say which companies have used this and have transformed and reported it back to me. The only thing I have seen is people being very enthusiastic and telling me on LinkedIn and Slack and wherever, yeah, we've been playing with it and we're using it to make changes. And I was too overwhelmed with all the stuff to keep track of who is doing what where. It would have been nice, but in a week and a half, I will be having a team. Yay, thank God. So finally, we can start reaching out to people who give us these signals and then ask them, what exactly have you been doing? And then figure out what kind of company is that, so that we can turn more of these into case studies. So I'm afraid, Almudena, 10 months is too early for me to give you an answer to that question. I know there's a lot of experimentation going on, but I have not been able on my own to keep track of all of that and turn that into case studies. I need a team to do that with me, and they will start very soon. So fingers crossed.
No, perfectly okay. I was aware there was all this enthusiasm in LinkedIn, and that's the reason I thought maybe we had already some sort of a statistic, but it's fair. 10 months is still not much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we will take a question from our online viewers. Jurgen, what do you think about employee journey crew? What this also a useful pattern crew for you? Why it's not in your model?
I think that's a very good suggestion. I would say this is a platform crew that could be solved by calling them a platform crew. It's a crew that serves everyone else. But maybe if demand is higher over time, we could identify it as something separate for sure. I compare it with Lego. As I said, there is definitely an option to add more bricks to the Lego box. If certain types are used a lot, then maybe we can make different versions of them, and we can separate out the platform crew into a couple of different ones and make one experience crew for the employees. So it's a good suggestion. I'm going to put it in the back of my mind and think about it for a while.
Do we have another question in the room?
Thank you. Nice talk. Which group were you most adamant about putting in or not putting in your overview? So which crew you decided the last that you put in?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Thanks for asking. I think that would be the partnership crew, the one that cares about the vendors, suppliers, and so on. I think it is the least common, probably the least used, probably, but maybe that is also a problem. It should be used more often. And maybe that is a bit of a personal bias, because I am often in that position, that I am the freelancer, the vendor, the gig worker, and being badly treated by clients. I just complained about it yesterday again. I went through the bureaucratic procedures of a procurement department. It cost me half an hour to upload all my details, and then I've never heard anything anymore from that client. I mean, seriously, for God's sake, there was half an hour of my life. You forced me to jump through all these hoops, and now that I am done, you ignore me. I think that's unfair. That's a bad experience. So I think it's not common in organizations to care as much about suppliers as they do about customers. Amazon is a really terrible example of that, I'm afraid. And we should care more about them. And I also added them because of I like symmetry. So if you have one on one side, why not also one on the other side? It makes sense. But you could say this is the one where I doubt it a little bit.
Okay, then a simple question from our online chat is, what do you think is your recommended crew size?
Well, in my book, Management 3.0, I've always said 5 plus or minus 2. That is basically my conclusion based on the research. The famous 7 plus or minus 2 from Scrum that they communicated earlier is actually not based on scientific research. The optimum is 5, according to researchers. But of course, it heavily depends on context. For example, online versus in person makes quite a bit of difference. I would urge even more smaller sizes, crew sizes, when you do all your work online, because it's then with 3 or 4 people, it's much easier to have quick meetings than with 7. But smaller is usually better. I start with 7 people on October 31 to help me, but I'm sure we're going to already break that up in maybe mission teams of 2 or 3 people who work on an objective with each other and then report back to the larger group of 7, because with 2 or 3 it is much easier to be fast, connect in a quick online chat than having to do that with 7 all the time. So keep them as small as possible. Actually, there's a nice anecdote of the web, the Cool Blue a case study. The CIO told me, I do not have many constraints on all those domains, but one is he did not want any team to grow larger than 7 people. He said that's the rule, because he told me they always have excuses of wanting yet another team member, of growing a little bit larger, and then I say no, then you'll just have to split, and then they decide not to split, and then I say, well, you see, it was not necessary after all. So that was a management constraint on 7 as the max size.
Hey, Jürgen, you can't see me yet. Hey, there's Wolfgang in the back of the room if the camera can turn. Hey, thank you. Great talk, first of all. Thank you very much for your keynote.
Thank you.
You said something about, in your model, you have these reforming teams, these dynamic teams. They're just there for a mission, then they reform, they go from team to team and so on. And you said something about team cohesion. So what's your take on that? How, I mean, long-lived teams should be together because the team cohesion grows and so on and so on.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Well,
my take on that is that you can separate it out into levels. The cohesion can happen at the base level. That's what they do at Pipedrive. The forming, storming, norming, performing happens with the 20 people who form the base. And they do the same with airlines. I mean, have you ever gone onto a flight seeing the airline crew do trust exercises with each other because they meet each other for the first time? Of course not. They already know each other. They do that outside of their missions as a slightly larger group of stewards, stewardesses, and pilots. So they already know how to work with each other. It's the same in hospitals, in fire departments, news crews, and so on. So the missions are temporary, but these people already know each other. Because the forming, storming, norming, performing, the sense of belonging, the cohesion, that happens at the base level, not at the mission level. If you do that well at the base level, you should be able to combine any number of people. One who has a great keynote on that, Joe Justice, I always refer to him. He shows his experience at working at Tesla factories that are maybe 100, 150-ish people or something like that. They do this every 3 hours. They form mission teams every 3 hours. They reform, self-organize, like in an open space kind of way, around the problems that need to be solved around the factory. So he said, learning goes through the roof, as you can imagine. Every 3 hours you work with different people, but in a short amount of time, you've met everyone, and everyone is one factory, and they're all in it together. So the psychological safety, trust, respect, etc., you all solve that at the level of the base. That's where you do the cohesion, so that you can reform dynamically around objectives. And personally, I find that interesting too, because as these examples show, you basically have two options. You have work objectives and you have teams. And traditionally, with agile methods such as Scrum, the work is resized to fit the available teams. But you can also do it the other way around. You can have resize the teams to fit the available work and say, well, this work needs 2 people for about 3 weeks. This work is a little bit larger, needs 4 people for 6 weeks. So for me, that feels more natural, that you dynamically size your teams to get objectives done than arbitrarily cutting up objectives in order to squeeze them into the available team boundaries that you try to keep static. I think you can solve that last one by making those mission teams and do the psychological safety, trust, and respect stuff in a larger context with the base.
Okay, and then one last question from our online people. In this case, we have somebody from Colombia asking you for advice, like how do you convince a manager to use the unified model? And another question goes in the same direction. Do you have like a guide for an introduction or how to start this transformation?
How do you convince managers to use and to do anything? Well, talk in their language. That was my tongue-in-cheek message at the end of my talk. That's how I have achieved success in the past. I try to understand what are the problems of the managers, of the executives. They are human beings too. Surprise. They need certain problems solved, which are not the same problems as the engineers have, or the product owners, or whatever. So listen to them, empathize. This is the core idea of design thinking and change, is empathizing with others. So empathize first with the managers, understand them, and then talk in their language. Don't use any engineering jargon, and then you get a lot further with anything that you suggest. Sorry, I didn't get the last question, but can you repeat that one?
Do you have like an introduction, an easy way to start the whole unFIX model?
Okay, so the easy way to start with unFIX is some patterns are easier than others. It's very simple to start with a forum. That's a guild. It's the same thing basically. I prefer forum these days. Because it doesn't change anything. It's just a place where people get together to talk about their role or to talk about something else that interests them. Very simple pattern. Many organizations already do this. So actually, I think most organizations already have certain patterns. It's not like I'm introducing something new here. I just paint the picture of good stuff that's already happening in many, many places. Look at your current organization, and I think a good step is just first draw what you are already doing. You will find that you already have stuff in place. That is your starting point. So try to draw what you have now, and then you will see what is missing or what you cannot draw. Like you cannot draw a matrix organization with the unFIX patterns. That is by design. I don't want you to be able to draw a matrix organization. I want you to draw a network organization. So that is a friction moment. And then you can think, okay, how can we solve this in the future? So that will be the next step. What are the scenarios for the future, a bit of scenario planning, in which we can move on by adding other patterns or removing anti-patterns, such as having managers on agile teams. They need to be moved out, and breaking the matrix, for example. So start with drawing what you already have. That's a good starting point.
Okay, thank you very much for being here. Jurgen Appelo, live from the Netherlands here to Austria, and from here it seems even way out of the world to Colombia. And
thank you so much.
Sorry, again, please.
Thank you so much. Hope to be there in live next time.
Thank you.
In person. Yeah.